Now tonight we're very lucky to have Michael Kaiser on the line. He's an eBay University instructor, author, and director at the National Center for Victims of Crime. Michael, wow, I'm really excited to have a chance to have you on the line.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Cindy. I love OSI, and I love you guys, and I've known Janelle for a long time, so this is really an honor for me to be on the call tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Let me tell you about my eBay experience to start out with. I started like many people on eBay many, many years ago. Actually, I had my 10th anniversary on eBay last August. And back in those days of yore, we found out about eBay mostly by word of mouth. That was the way we found out about eBay. And a good friend of mine called me one day and said, Michael, my sister-in-law just found this most amazing site called eBay. You've got to go check out the stuff there. So, of course, I went, and lo and behold, it didn't take long until I was buying up a storm. And later I started to learn how to sell things. And back in the old days, it was a pretty rough sled, and even just getting pictures on the site, it was quite a challenge. But one morning, it was really quite an interesting time back then. Then my wife, who is an author, she wrote Weddings for Dummies. And after she wrote Weddings for Dummies, we wrote a quick proposal to the Dummies people about, I don't want to really call them the Dummies people, but that's what we call them in our shorthand, about writing a book about collecting, which they summarily rejected, and we put in the file cabinet for a while. Then one morning, a friend of ours called, said, my boss just saw Meg Whitman on the Today Show, and we want to write a book about eBay, and she worked for a large publishing house in New York City. Do you know anybody that knows anything about eBay? I know you guys are into antiques, and we'd like to write that book on eBay. So we wrote a proposal for her, and she submitted it to eBay, and they accepted my wife and myself as the authors, and we ended up writing the first official eBay guide to buying and selling and collecting just about anything that came out in 1999.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. That's an exciting venture. I understand you collect art glass, and there was some mention of that in that book.
Well,
we have an art glass collector online.
Really like to give real life examples, and none are more real life than the ones that come from your own closet, right? So,
yeah.
So there's a couple of pieces featured in the book and some other things from around our house as well.
Oh, great. So now tonight you've actually got a presentation for us about training the trainer. I'm pretty excited to see it if we go online. Michael, I think we should probably turn this presentation over to you. What do you think?
I'm ready to rock and roll.
All right.
I've been an eBay University instructor since 2002, and I've probably trained about 8,000 to 10,000 people. But in my other job at the National Center for Victims of Crime, I'm also a trainer. So I train people all around the country, and I've given a lot of thought to how to be a good presenter, and I've actually done a lot of train-the-trainer presentations for people across the country. So I'm really excited about doing this for eBay folks tonight. So when I do a lot of training, and this is sort of one of the ways, and I create a lot of trainings, I write a lot of training curriculums, one of the things I often start with is this little thing called define the words. And the reason I start with this is because I think a lot of times in our day-to-day life, we use words and we just throw them out like, I'm going to do a training, I'm going to be training people, or I'm going to be doing a presentation. But we don't often stop and think about what those words really mean. I always think to go back and reflect a little bit. And what do we mean by the word training? What does it mean to train someone? And what is the outcome that we're looking for when we're training people? And usually when we use that word, or the way that I use it, and I think the context that I'd like to use it tonight with all of you, is it's about change. It's getting people to change the way they do things. And so training is obviously a very important thing that we do in a lot of different ways in life. And sometimes it's a very formal thing in front of a room with 1,000 people, and sometimes it's it's one-on-one, teaching people how to do things differently and hopefully better. And the reason that I point that out in response to a presentation, because a presentation can be about change, but a presentation also sometimes is just about conveying information or new information. going to present on a new topic. And what I really want people to be are trainers, and especially when we're talking about eBay, the reason that they might come to us as an education specialist, or maybe they come to an eBay university, because they are really looking to change the way they do things, pick up new information. So when we go to train, what are we? Are we presenters, trainers, facilitators, something else, rock stars, or coaches? And we'll talk about this for a second. We're always presenting because we're up in front of the room and we're giving out information and everybody's focused on us. And we're trainers because we're engaging people in the process of change. And they're looking for us to show them the way to do that. That's what trainers do. They take you from point A down to point B to point C, E to P. And they're counting on you to sort of have that roadmap and that path for making that happen. And now we're also facilitators as well, and I think this is something that people often forget about. And a facilitator is someone absorbing everything that's going on in the room and really being the traffic cop and listening and making some changes along the way as they're training. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in a little more depth about what it means to really be a facilitator and move the program along. And then are we something else? Well, when we're training on eBay, we usually are something else, right? We're experts. We are mystifying the platform for a lot of people, especially if you're doing the basics and even a lot of times and beyond the basics. And we're probably seen as a model for the people in the room. Since eBay education specialists and eBay instructors in general are users of the platform, we often have a lot of experience in using eBay and a lot of different types of experiences on eBay. So we really are something else. We're experts, but we're also, at the same time, we're on the same level playing field because that's eBay, a level playing field, and we're all users, and that's the way we operate on eBay. We're rock stars because we're out there pushing the envelope and getting people to hop on board something new, something great, and to really help them achieve their goals. And then we're coaches. And this is a really important part about being a presenter and a trainer. And I know that a lot of you who are listening on this call, some of you are working in, a lot of different size groups. Maybe some people have as many as 30 or 40 people in a training. Some people might have as few as 3 or 4 or 5. And that's where we really try to make the personal connection and try to help people reach their next level, and we move with them forward in that way. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move on. To understand how to be a good trainer, really important to understand how adults learn. And adults learn differently than kids, right? Kids are blank slates. Now, I have some young kids, and every day for them, new information that they didn't even know existed before. It's like the world is an amazing place, and there's, a new bird, a new flower, or it's going to snow. We're going to go to a new town. Everything is new, and they're piling up new information. Well, by the time you get to an adult, you've accumulated a lot of stuff up there in your brain, right? And you have a lot of information, and adults have opinions. So when a child goes to school, they don't decide what's important to be learned. They're told that by the teacher. What I do when someone comes into one of your eBay classes, they're deciding what's important for them to be learned, what they want to learn that day. And they'll decide that for themselves. No matter what your agenda is, no matter what you want to tell them, sometimes you have to break through that. They're going to decide for themselves. Now, another thing that adults need to do, they need to validate that information based on beliefs and their own experience, right? And you know how this goes, because this is when you're in a class, someone raises it, and you make a point, and somebody raises their hand, and they said, that's exactly what happened to me. And when they say that, they're not just raising their hand to be, a repetitive person in your class. They're actually going through that process of validating the information. You just said something that clicked for them, and now they need to kind of say it out loud. Not everybody needs to say it out loud, but some people, as we all know, need to say it out loud. Right? So they need to say that out loud and validate that experience. And it's a very, very important part of the adult learning process. And now here's one that's key to all of us when we're training on eBay, which is the information that we give them has to be immediately useful. It has to be something they can take home and use right away. Now, that's not a problem because basically what we're teaching them is things that they can use right away. But that's what they're there for. And what I've found in a lot of the training that I've done, probably seen this as well, is that sometimes people come to these trainings with one question that they want to have answered. They want to sit through the whole day to get one question answered. Of course, along the way, we hope that they'll get other things, but that's what they're looking for. And so one little tip that I would give you that I usually do if I was in a small group, obviously when we're doing eBay universities, sometimes we have, 500, 600 people in the room, we can't do this. But if I'm in a small group, right, I'm going to go around and I'm going to ask people, what do you expect to learn today? Why did you come here? What's your goal? What is it that you want to walk away with today? And I use that as a way to get some of those questions out early. Here's something that I think, that again differs us from kids, is that adults have experiences on which to draw, and I know that everybody knows this is true, right? Most adults have some opinions. Do people have opinions about eBay?
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, right? They come in and they have opinions about eBay. They have well-formed opinions about eBay, some of which are totally incorrect, and many of which are correct, right? So, Cindy, you've experienced this before, right?
No, never.
And a lot of times, if we're getting into trouble, we're bumping up against those opinions. And a lot of times, our job as eBay instructors, at least certainly at eBay University, is to get them to think a little more broadly, to be polite. So, how do we shift that? How do we activate those adult learning principles? And that's really what we have to talk about. We have to focus on the real world, right? Well, the great thing about teaching about eBay is that it's all real world, right? We're talking about a site that hopefully people have had some experience on. We can talk about real world examples. Many people, even though the site can be different for people and have different, they can have different experiences because they could be selling in a lot of different types. They could be operating in a lot of different kinds of markets. Some of the experiences are somewhat universal and can be applied across the whole platform. And you need. We'll talk about that a little bit later too, about sort of using war stories and how to use those. Emphasizing how the learning can be applied is also an extremely important element of adult learning, because you need to sometimes give people a picture of what they could be doing. So when you're talking about something like research, you need to give them examples of how research could really help them, and not just say, oh, well, you need to research thing, that's step one. No, here's what research can do for you on eBay, and here's how you do it, and not just how you do it, like go do this, put in the name, look at this, look at closed, completed auctions, go over to Terapeak. This is not just the mechanical, but start to give them a vision for how it could work in their own situation. And people do that leap. They can't make the leap from, the technical sort of follow steps A, B, and C, right, to how it could actually be integrated into their business or their way of doing things. And I think that's a really important thing that you do as an instructor. And I think, Cindy, you use a lab, right, sometimes?
Yeah, actually, I do teach hands-on, where we actually go to eBay and walk through step by step how to list.
Yeah, so they really can get in it, and that's the kind of experience that helps them start to learn how to apply it to themselves. And often you can see the light bulbs going off in people's heads, right, if you're paying attention, right?
Yeah, it is. It's sort of like when they hit that one button or that one thing, it's like this little light bulb over their head. Yes, it's really a charge to see it.
So that's really important. And then you need to relate the learning to the goals. And this is back to what I said earlier about how sometimes I go around the room and ask people what they hope to learn in the day. Do that because when people tell me that, I'm always adjusting what I'm saying in every training to try and make sure if somebody said, I really want to understand return policies, I'm really flummoxed by that, I'll make sure that over the course of the day I hit that over and over and over again, and I'll use war stories and examples of that as a way to really try and reinforce for them what it is they've come to learn. Relate the material to past experiences, and I want to talk about this a little bit later too, but because they are adults and because they do have experiences and they have been in the world, you can try and draw them into those common experiences or to similar experiences, and this helps them learn. And then allow discussion and challenge of ideas. Also really, really important. Adults learn through the dialogue that goes on, right? So you need to learn and respect participants' opinions, right? So I'll ask you this question, Cindy, because I know that you must get this. People ever disagree with you about things on eBay?
Oh gosh, never. Absolutely. They often do. When I say something, they give me a crosswayed look. So.
Yeah, sure. How many people disagree about when you should leave feedback?
Yeah, that's one of our most hotly debated subjects, isn't it?
Yeah, or how about what their return policy should be?
Mm-hmm.
Or about what kinds of forms of payment they should take, right? So they need to challenge those, and people need to have the ability to express different opinions, and that's really important. And then this is something that I think, especially you guys doing education specialist programs that are smaller. I try to do this in the big eBay use. It's really hard, but participants can be resources for each other. Now, you all know this because you're all part of OSI, and you're on the forums there. You're you're in those kinds of things, and you understand that. But that needs to take place in the training as well. And so this is where the facilitator part sometimes come in. Even though you're the expert and you're the trainer and you're all these things, you have people in the room who are highly skilled, right? I did an eBay U about a month ago, and I do my little thing. I go around the room and I ask people, how many of you have, 50 feedback, 100 feedback, 1,000 feedback? Who has, where are my power sellers, blah, blah. And I'm like, how many of you have more than, I don't normally do this. I go, like, anybody here have more than 5,000 feedback? And this woman raises her hand, and I'm like, well, how many feedback do you have? And she says, 15,000. And I'm like, this is a Beyond the Basics course, right? And I'm like, okay, so she knows something about eBay. So I'm going to use her as a resource for other people in the room, and maybe even for me if I get stuck someplace. We'll talk about her a little later, because it was funny, because even though she had all that feedback and all those things, and I thought to myself, oh, what am I going to be able to teach this person? She had a lot to learn. So that's another thing. You got to treat people like adults. And now this is the hardest one for people often is you have to allow participants to have control. Are you ready to give up control, Cindy, to everybody in the room?
Oh, I'm too much of a control freak, I think, to quite go there yet. But
Right. Well, you have to do that in a way because, and we can talk a little bit about ways to do that, but you have to let adults find a way to influence the outcome of the day. And that is, like I said, some of the things that I said before about, asking them what they want to learn, listening to what they say in their questions, because their questions are often much deeper than what's being asked, and trying to come back and relate the material back to them as much as you can. So here's just some general stuff about working the room. And I know it's hard because some of you may be, working at a computer or working on a PowerPoint, but you've got to make eye contact continuously, right? And you've got to make that eye contact with people, and then you have to make sure that they're receiving what you're saying. And the only way to know whether someone's receiving what you're saying is if you're looking at them and you're talking and they're nodding their head back to you. And if you have a lot of bobbleheads in the audience as you look around, up and down, up and down, and up and down, it means that those people are receiving what you're getting, right? They're really hearing you. And
I can kind of have a hard time when I'm doing it. I find that friendly eye contact person, and I have a hard time leaving them to look around the room. You find that one friendly face.
Yeah, that's really that's really true. And it's interesting because I think you have to, even in a very big room, kind of everybody in the room has to feel like they've made eye contact with you all the time, even though you might not be looking directly at them.
Uh-huh.
And you're right. There's always that one person who's like really eager, right? And is like on the edge of their seat for every word that you're going to say, and they're just like looking at you, right? And they're like laser focused on you. But you have to break away and move around to your other students as well. That's really important.
Yes.
So active listening, which is really the art of trying to hear. I mean, there are books written on active listening, and it's something that people use in social work and counseling and all those things. But it's really tuning in to the essence of what someone is saying. And the best example of that really is when somebody gets into like a long-winded question, and they have this question, and it takes them like a long time to get it out, and then you paraphrase it back to them, right? Oh, okay. So that whole thing that you were saying to me is your question was really about when are you supposed to leave negative feedback? Then they say, oh yeah, that's my question, and that's active listening. So maybe what they were talking about was, oh, I don't, this whole negative feedback thing on eBay, I don't get it, I don't understand it. Why do they even have it? People with with only one feedback shouldn't be able to use it. Blah 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 blah, and da 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 da. And you kind of say, what I hear you saying is that you're trying to understand how to use negative feedback. Yes, and that's active listening. And you really have to work on those skills. And it's really just a matter of like a laser focus on that person as they're talking, trying to understand what they're saying. And this is a really important skill and you've seen great trainers do this especially when they're doing a Q&A or something, that they really get underneath what people are saying. And normally they paraphrase it, say, here's what I hear you saying. They might even use that phrase a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then being responsive to subtle shifts. And by this I mean that what you want to do is just watch your room, right? You've been talking for 20 minutes. People look bored. Give them a break, right? People are, maybe you don't do your Q&A till after the session, but people are like, somebody's just dying to answer this question, and you realize, I got to answer that question because if I don't answer, this person's not going to learn anything else until I answer her question, right? I could go on for the next hour, and if she doesn't get her question answered, she's just going to sit there stuck in the old thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you can scroll down here. These things kind of fly in on this page. There you go. So relax, get your head clear, right? Do whatever it is you need to do before you get started. That's very important. Find your little space. I know, for me, it's usually to sometimes I actually focus on something totally unrelated to what I'm going to present on just to get my head clear. I'll read the newspaper. I'll get into a conversation about something totally inane that has nothing to do with what I'm going to train on. I'll talk about the weather. And in a way, that gets my head clear because when I walk into the room, I turn it on and it comes, as opposed to overthinking what I'm going to do. Now, I don't know, Cindy, maybe you have a different technique for getting your head clear before training.
I pretty much I overthink it. I think when I'm driving to class, I'm always thinking, okay, what am I going to say? How am I going to start? That kind of thing. So
yeah, well, that's
I probably overthink it a little bit too much.
Well, it's really, I guess what I'm trying to say is what works for you, what gets you into the right mode, and maybe that is important for you while you're driving to sort of like be prepared. And for me, it's sort of just clearing my head so that when I walk in, I can do it. Anticipating questions, important. You get questions at an eBay training? You bet. Right. You're going to get a lot of questions. And so thinking ahead about what some of those questions are and what your answers are going to be is really important. Oh, and practice, and practice, and practice. And, if you have to stand in front of the mirror and do it, or if you just have to do it in your head, that's really important. Now, this next rule is one that I break all the time. Okay, this is my downfall as a trainer. I spent too much time living in New York, so it's very hard for me to speak slowly and clearly. But that's what you need to do, right? Everybody needs to be able to hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Let people know where you are in the material is also a very important element of doing a training. Sometimes I know, like for example, doing an eBay training, you want to just might say, I'm on this page in the book, or I'm on that page, or here we are with the beginning section. Really helps people. When you're doing a long all-day training, people just get lost a lot, right? They go down and get their drink of water. They go out to use the bathroom. They, are thinking about their Christmas list. They're doing other things during the course of the day, right? And they just need to know, where are you? What page are you on? What's going on? So just be proactive with that. And as I was saying about the active listening, it's very important to repeat questions. When somebody asks a question, repeat it. Here's what they just asked. Not everybody, that's also because people can always do it. And rephrase it if you feel it could be done. Respect your audience. I mean, we're going to have people at all levels in our audience, and they're going to be, like I said, you're going to have someone with a 15,000 feedback, and you're going to have someone who's like, feedback, what's that? And you need to figure out a way to work with all those people. Humor. And Cindy, I don't know if you have any ideas about this, but I think humor is really, if you talk to people and ask them, and normally when I do a training like this, since this isn't really an interactive training, name the best trainer you ever saw, right? Now tell me what made them a great trainer. And invariably, somebody will say, oh, he was great. And why was he great? He was so funny. He was such a crack-up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people learn by humor. I don't know. There's something reinforcing about humor that, maybe it's the collective piece of it. But you got to be careful with humor because not all jokes land equally on people, and people get offended easily. So my little rule about humor is I think I'm always safe when I'm making fun of myself because, who can get upset at me making fun of myself?
Mm-hmm.
Not too many people. And even when I'm teaching eBay, I'll use examples of where I've made a big mistake, right? I mean, I once got an unpaid item strike against me, right? Kind of the curse of eBay. I help, and I stand up and say, even me, here I am in front of the room, right? Guess what? I totally screwed up, and make it into a funny story about how, and at the same time reinforcing a point. But use it, but be careful how you use it. This is a basic one really for all of you. Make sure you get to your room in advance. Make sure it's set up the way you want it to be set up. Make sure, your audio, your visual, everything's working, right? I mean, the last thing, it's really unprofessional to have those kinds of issues. And I can tell you, if you're doing an eBay training and there's a technology problem, people are going to be like, hello, what's going on here? Take breaks. A wise trainer once told me that people basically have about a 20-minute attention span. And if you don't take a break or change the topic or change the way that you're on a fairly frequent basis, you'll lose people. And what I ask...
How often... I'm going to interrupt, sorry. How often do you take breaks, like if you're giving a 3-hour class?
Well, if I was giving a 3-hour class, I mean, what we do at the big eBay use, which are, all day 6 hours, is we usually go 45 minutes to an hour, then 15 minutes of Q&A, then a break. And the Q&A is, at some level a break because the tension changes and the dynamic in the room changes so that what's going on in the room changes a lot because now the focus is down on the floor and up on the stage and people are asking questions and people are nodding their heads, oh, yeah, I had that question too, or blah, 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 blah. So that changes it. But 40 to 45 minutes is a long time, I think. Think about classes in high school. They're only 45 minutes, right? Even a lot of college classes are only like 40 or 45 minutes. So, taking a break. And breaks are good because breaks allow people to, sometimes we think that training is only what happens when we're in front of the room talking to people, right? But breaks are, taking the time to integrate that knowledge. And maybe they're talking to their neighbor and saying, what Cindy just said was like, I finally figured that out. And they're like, oh, yeah, I was struggling with that too. And while they're talking, gets back to your adult principles, learning principles, they're teaching each other. They're using each other as resources, and they're integrating the learning. And when they sit back down, they're very focused, and now they're ready to go again. And now here's also a tough one for people. Remember, you don't have to know everything. There's only about 2 people in the world who probably know everything about eBay, and Janelle is 3 of them. I mean, excuse me. And and you don't need to know. And sometimes, for example, you might be doing an eBay training, and somebody might ask you a question about something you really don't know about, like, what's the best way to sell a printing press? And if you've never sold a printing press, there's probably some general comments you can make about that. But then I would ask the audience, does anybody here sell industrial equipment? Now, if you have a small group, it's not likely. But if I do that in an eBay U, just going to hand and say, oh, yeah, I sell industrial equipment. And what I do is say, you over there who sells industrial equipment, and you here who has that question, the next break, I expect you in the back of the room talking. And you guys go figure it out, and he'll help you do it. And people just love to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Be enthusiastic. This is really important. If you're not happy, your class is not going to be happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, they're just not. Dress well. Okay. Well, this one, I get this question a lot sometimes when I'm doing training. Well, how should I dress? Well, you need to dress appropriately for your audience. And well doesn't mean, if everybody's going to be in, a sweatshirt and jeans, okay. But you still should dress better than them, and you should be respectful in the way that you dress. Avoid slang and jargon. This is something that I wouldn't worry as much about doing eBay, but sometimes I would, because sometimes people, get lost. There are some acronyms that people use. So try to avoid slang and jargon. Try to explain things in very clear and simple English as much as you can. If you were to be writing a training manual on eBay, you'd probably want to write it to like the 6th or 7th grade so everybody got it. Now, war stories in eBay are very important, right? I mean, everybody has things to tell, and you should use diverse war stories about your experience on eBay. And so, especially when you're training people on a kind of how-to thing, this is how you do something, right? You want to stop and give them an illustration of what you mean, and that's what I mean by a war story. So, like the example I just gave before, like when I'm talking about unpaid items, right? Tell my story about when I had an unpaid item. When I'm talking about, a return policy, I might talk about the number of times or the times that I had returns or take returns. And I'll use a lot of different stories, which do a couple of different things. One is, remember back to that adult learning principle of people trying to relate things to their own experience. The more you talk about your experience, the more likely you are to come across something that's similar to their experience, and then they will integrate that information, because you'll be legitimizing that experience for them, right? You'll be legitimizing what they're doing, and it's just an interesting way that people learn. Oh, so Michael does that too? Oh, so I am doing it the right way, right? That's the way adults learn, isn't it? At some level, they kind of get it legitimized for themselves that what they're doing is okay. Use examples from across a platform. I think this is really important when we're talking about eBay. Some of us might only be selling, we might be teaching eBay, but we might really be selling very limited number of categories. Now, one of Michael's mantras about eBay is that eBay is thousands and thousands of micro markets. That's the way I talk about eBay. I talk about the art glass market being, night and day from the iPod market, which is night and day from the industrial machine department, which is night and day from people who are selling, who might be selling cars. And you need to have examples from across the platform, which really means that if you don't sell in a lot of different categories, you need to go and look at those categories and understand them and understand the dynamics in those categories so that you can use different examples to show people how people accomplish things on eBay in different kinds of ways. And the way I do that a lot is I really talk, I go and do a lot of research in different areas, and I just make sure I know what's going on in those areas like computers and other kinds of things. And what I really do, and this is actually, I think, something that can be really helpful to trainers, is that I pay very close attention to my buying habits. So if I were to go buy a laptop, or if I were to go buy a digital camera, or if I'm going to go buy an espresso machine, as I'm going through that process, I pay vivid attention to how those people are marketing in those categories, to how they're distinguishing their listings in those categories, to what kinds of pricing strategies they're using in those categories. So who's using buy it now? Who's using 99 cents no reserve auction? Who's using, some combination? What kinds of features are they using? How many photos are they using? How are they distinguishing their listings from the other listings that all look, basically the same? And I look for those good examples, and I talk about those in my training. And I'll say, for example, I was trying to buy an espresso machine for my wife for Christmas, and I was looking through, and here's what I saw that was going on in the espresso market, which is different than the coffee grinder market, for example. So use those. Use hypotheticals with your class. Get them people to raise their hand. So how many of you, if I told you you could have X, Y, or Z, would do this? Okay, great. Getting people to raise their hands is as simple as doing simple polling. Like I said, I always, poll my class on a lot of different things all the time. It does a funny thing. It kind of gets them involved, right? How many of you have, have a unrestricted return policy? Great. How many of you don't? Okay. Let's talk to you people who don't, right? Sort of put people into different groups, and then they feel like you're really speaking to them, right? Okay. Now I have a little lecture for you. I'm going to give you about that. Why you should have that. So back to my 15,000 feedback person.
Mm-hmm.
So she's in my class, and she has 15,000 feedback, and she doesn't accept returns. And I'm shocked.
Wow.
So we have a long talk about it, and I don't know if I totally 100% convinced her by the end of the day, but I think I did, to change her return policy. So you can teach somebody new things, and then use best practice examples. And this is something that I'm really I'm adamant about. If you're going to, and I don't know how everybody's doing their eBay trainings, but if you're going to use a listing, for example, for a training, you should use a listing that reflects all the best practices that you're talking about over the course of the day, so that it reinforces the best model. If you're going to talk about things like return or payment policies or shipping, always use the best practices that you can, and always model for people the best that they can be, because I think that's what people are hoping that you and the way you operate. And give them, smile. You got to smile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Training, got to smile a lot. So what I was going to say again about the best is, give them some tips too. Like, give them. I think one way that people really are impressed by a trainer, how they let into their own way of thinking. And certainly the way I've used eBay has evolved over 10 years. And there are things that I used to do that I no longer do. And I have to respond to the changes on eBay different kinds of ways, especially as, give a perfect example for eBay would be, how does, as shipping has gotten more expensive, as it's gotten more competitive, as eBay is changing the platform to, emphasize shipping costs or cheaper shipping costs, how do you take advantage of that? And what have you done? And how have you changed your practices do that? And I'll give you my example that I've been using recently is I've started putting in all my listings exactly the weight that I'm putting in the calculator. So I've gone to my double transparency on shipping as just something that I do. I wouldn't recommend that everybody do it, and I'm not telling everybody, saying this is what I've done so that people get less confused. Because of the whole zip code thing, because shipping is so expensive now, I just want people to know how I'm putting it all together. Since I can't talk to them in person, I don't want to spend a lot of time emailing them, why is it so expensive? I just want to say, this is a large glass item. It's going to be double boxed. It's going to be 8 pounds is what I put in the shipping calculator. And so now they can just decide, right, if that's reasonable or not. And so I just let people into my thinking about that. And I think that helps them a lot. We can go beyond the smiles now. Okay. So there are going to be problem participants, and we'll try and move through this a little quickly so we can get some questions in here at the end. You've got to eliminate or minimize problem behavior. The people in the room, if there's somebody else misbehaving, they're counting on you as the trainer to address that problem and eliminate it. That is your job, and you've got to do it. And you can't do it by saying, get the heck out of here, right? You have to do it by maintaining the self-esteem of the problem learner. So you need to go to that person, say, here's a common one, Cindy. I don't know if you've had this one very often. I've had this one. People who can't help themselves and just have to talk all the time, and they just can't help themselves. Then you need to really go to the person in private, to avoid further disruption, and say, maybe to break and say, look, really got to tone it down. Other people are here to learn. I know you have a lot to say. I know you've been using eBay a lot. I know you've got a long history, but there are other people here, and they're really here to listen. Think that you can try and hold on to it. And maybe I'll even call on you later when I think there's an area that you know something a lot about that would be helpful to the group. But can you do that for me? And just try to get an agreement from them, right? Just try. People are pretty reasonable, and they'll follow what you want to do. But you've got to interrupt it, stop it, and avoid further because it's not fair to the rest of the people in the group. Go on here.
I know we have on the Educational Specialist Board, we have lots of questions about how to deal with these kind of problems. So I'm glad you're addressing them for us.
Yeah, well, it's really common in training because, training is just a group dynamic, right? And when you get people in a group, people behave like they do in a group.
Right.
So use question and answer techniques sort of is a way of handling a problem by saying, getting people to stop and saying and interacting with the group in another way. Like, I have a question for you all. Who else does this, right? So that's how you might get someone to stop talking. Oh, so you do it, Cindy. Let's talk about you, Cindy. And you can even, shift your body in the room. If you're standing in the front of the room, right, and say it's sort of one person's on the right and there's something on the left, and a new person you want to deal with is on the left, you can actually turn your body away from the person who's being the problem, focus on the person on the left, right, and the whole room's going to go with you. And they're going to leave them on the end of the room. And you may not notice this. It might not be conscious to the room, but you can actually split the room. If you're in a small group, and there's, let's say, use that same example, and there's someone on the right and someone on the left, and the person has a problem on the right, you have an aisle in the middle, walk right up the aisle to where that person, turn your back to them, and face the other half of the room. And it's a very clear message that I'm shutting you down, right, without saying a word. And that's what you need to do. Vary your activities, so maybe if somebody's really being a problem, that's the time to take a break. Oh, we're taking a break now, right? Or speak, and definitely speak privately with that person, and be available before and after the presentations, because if there's a problem person in the room, other people are going to come up and they want a chance to complain to you about them, right? We have habits, in big groups, people saying, you've got to do something about that person. She's driving me nuts. And, you got to take it, and you got to do it, and you got to say, I know, I heard you, I've talked to her. Again, I'm going to kick her out, right? So, because you need to maintain your credibility with the rest of the learners, right? If you don't address a problem, you're going to lose people from learning for the rest of the day. And that's really antithetical to what you're trying to achieve, right?
Right.
In your training. So you've always got to be, aware of that. On now. Okay, so meet Tim. That's sort of the end. We're going to be ready for questions, Janelle. So I don't know if that's, we want to just tell people that if they have questions, we can, we'll be ready in a second. This is actually something that I came up with just actually recently. I'm always thinking about training. So Tim is a phone company in Italy, my former doorman in New York, and maybe your uncle, Tim. But to me, Tim has now become, in a training, and I love this, is tools, give people tools. We give them inspiration, and we motivate. So those are the hands-on stuff that we do, right? Let me show you how to use Turbo Lister so that you can, get more listings on eBay faster, be more efficient. That's a tool, right? Let me inspire you. I'm going to tell you how I, finally was able to list 100 items in a day, right? And I'm going to tell you this story from my own life, right? Now I'm going to motivate you by telling you how much money I actually made, right? And this is what we do in training, especially in eBay. This is actually something that really came to me after the last eBay U I did as sort of a, wow, this is what I really do. I tools, inspire, and motivate. And if you can remember that, kind of put that in your brain, And remember that as you're going through a training. What am I doing now? I'm doing tools. Ooh, I need to inspire people. Let me give them a story. Now I'm going to motivate them. I'm going to help them achieve their goals. I'm going to help them, motivate them to go to the next step. A lot of what we do when we eBay is cheerleading and motivating, right? Because a lot of the how-to stuff people are going to get at some level as they move along. But I know that people come to eBay Used to build their inspiration and their confidence and to be motivated to go home. So,
yeah, I think that's a big part of being a teacher is that inspiration and motivation. Huge.
Yeah, and it's really, I think it's what will, if you went and asked people that question, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what makes a great trainer? They'll say, this person really inspired me. This person motivated me. This person made me want to, you know, they might not use actually those words, but they might say, well, this person, when I got home, I started to change the way I did things right away, right? Well, that's motivation. If somebody gets you to change your behavior, you've been motivated, right? That's the highest form of motivation would be behavioral change in my mind. Maybe there's others, but, you know, psychologists might disagree with me on that. But, you know, that's from the perspective. And that's what we do a lot when we teach eBay. We motivate people, we inspire them, and then we give them tools, right? Help them become more efficient, help them do things better. We help them get bigger velocity in their business. We help them make more money, give them the tools to do that. But as from my experience, a lot of the people that come to the eBay classes need the inspiration and motivation as much as the tools. We can't forget that because it's easy to get lost and bogged down in, okay, so now this is how you fill out this form, right? Well, that's not really inspiring. It's important, but it's not inspiring.
Absolutely.
Right? They want to hear how they can become a power seller. They want to dream about being a power seller. They want to dream about training other people to be power sellers, right?
Yes, exactly.
You know, that's what makes eBay so amazing and so empowering. That's what people want to do. So I don't, you know, so Cindy, do you have some? I know left you some questions.
Yeah, we've got some questions, and then I think maybe Janelle can pop on in here in a few minutes and ask some questions too.
Okay.
Well, my first question is, you know, you were talking about active listening.
Right.
Do you actually have any books you'd recommend us reading?
It's been so long since I've been trained in active listening that I would, you know, my suggestion would be that I would go to my favorite search engine. We're not going to promote anyone over another here tonight, and I would just and I would search for that term, and I would see what people have out there, and I'm sure you'll find some really good stuff. It's a concept that's used in a lot of different disciplines. Training is only one. It's also used in a lot of counseling. It's used in social work and other things. But you'll find good stuff, and people should read about that. It's a good suggestion.
Yeah, definitely. I came across active listening before, but it's been a while since I've you know, had anything or, you know, had any kind of training. So it's a good thing to review, definitely. So, you know, do my favorite search engine here pretty soon. We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Our Sharon Ware, she wanted to say hello. She's actually a certified business consultant, and she wanted to say hello, Michael. And if you have, her question is if a student tells you they need to make a full-time income selling on eBay, what advice would you give them?
Oh, what a great question! Thank you, Sharon. You know, when I do, you know, we all have our little spiels that we do when we do these trainings, right? And one of my first things, especially in the Beyond the Basics, you know, there's a whole thing about setting objectives. And one of the questions I ask, of course, is how many of you are here to quit your day job, right? Well, of course, you know, 50% of the room, you know, raises their hand. And I say, well, that's great, but do you really know a day job? And so the question I would have for people in that situation, the answer I have is like, you need to go back and look. How much money are you really making, right? If you had to make your salary, your pension, your health benefits, you know, how much profit would you need to make that happen? And sort of back out of that number, you know, what you're thinking about selling, how many of those units you would need to sell in order to do that, and what kind of size, what scale business would you need to make that happen, right? I mean, if you're selling items that you're clearing $500 an item for, and you only need to make $50,000 a year, you only need to sell 100 of those items a year, right? Did I do the math correctly here? That's 2 items a week.
Yeah.
So, that's the different kind of business than someone who needs to sell 100 items a week. And that's going to change your structure. So you can't really answer that question fully. Start to get them into the frame of mind to think about a business plan, a trajectory to achieving that. And that's how I would probably handle that question.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent points, Michael. I have a question, and then I'm going to turn it over and let Janelle ask questions. But I got one more question for you.
Okay.
Now, I was listening to a podcast that you did with Janelle actually earlier this year, where you were talking about selling on eBay for your local school and doing fundraising.
Right.
And you sort of talked about teaching others in your area to do the same. What I thought was really interesting was that the idea of giving free classes, with the contract of selling something for a charity. I thought that was a great idea. Do you have any tips, or have you tried it?
Well, the thing that we did, and actually my wife deserves all the credit for this. So we lots at daughter's local public school here, because obviously public schools don't have enough money to do everything they need to do to give a good education. And so she started a little committee, and people signed up for that committee to come and help list these items, because it's a lot of work to if you're working to do these other things, you're not making any money, you're selling it all for charity. And the 2 women, there were 3 women originally, but one dropped out. The 2 came, and one of the things that really motivated them to participate in doing the charity work was that they really wanted to learn about eBay. And so she's been teaching them about eBay, and they've gotten very psyched about that. And that's given me the idea that this could be a really good thing to do. And I've thought about actually doing a training, like doing an eBay class and saying, you can come to this class for free, and either A, you have to commit to selling something, or you have to bring something worth more than $25 that we're going to sell, right, on eBay for you. So, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, and I think charity can often be inspiring to people.
It's awesome. And, it's also a great way to market your business as well. So.
Well, that's right. And, a lot of people will come to that training, as we know, and then they'll say, well, you know what, find me a trading assistant. Oh, here I am, right? That's tough for me, right?
Yeah. Now, is Janelle there? Is she going to have some questions? Hi, Janelle.
Hi, guys. Nice job, Michael.
Thank you.
I've got a list of questions.
Okay.
I only have 5 minutes, but I have a list. Yeah.
Oh, I've hogged up the time.
Just fire those yes or no questions at me.
These aren't yes or no. So the first one, Michael, is how long have you been on tour with eBay U, and how did you start with eBay U?
Okay, well, 2002, so that's pushing 5 years now. Kind of hard to believe. And how did I start on teaching at eBay U?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a pretty quick story, too. I mean, I'd written the book back in 1999, and when, I can't remember what year exactly they started eBay University, I think 2000 or 2001, and they did it for a while, and they were about to retool it, and they were looking for new instructors, so they called me. I know that's not the answer everybody wants to hear, but they called me because they knew me because I'd written the book, and they said, hey, would you like to do this? And I was like, well, of course. I'd like to do it. So, they really reached out to me because I was a known entity to them at that time.
Michael, I'm a little bit sad that you haven't pitched the name of your book, because it's one of my favorite books.
It's the official eBay guide to buying, selling, and collecting just about anything. And I will say this, that it was written in 1999, and it's never been updated. So it's a historical relic of the eBay era. But there's still, it's funny because, Janelle, you and I were just sort of talking about this a little bit earlier today. There's still a lot of things in there which, are universal about eBay, like planning, having a business plan. And half the book is actually about collecting. So if you're into collecting, there's some interesting tidbits in there as well.
And Michael's not so good at tooting his own horn, but if you walk into eBay in San Jose into their offices, Michael's book is actually in the showcases when you walk in, along with the Pez dispensers and all the other original memorabilia from eBay as well.
Yeah, that kind of gives me a thrill, too, I must admit.
We have another really great question, and this comes from a newer eBay education specialist, and she wants to know, what is the difference between an eBay education specialist and someone like you who tours with eBayu?
From a curriculum perspective, not a lot. We basically use the same curriculum that the education specialists use, as far as I know. We're using the same basics and same beyond the basic training. So in that regard, not a lot of difference. I think, one of the things actually I didn't say in the beginning of this training, which I think is really always important to note, one of the things that makes us a little different is, one, a lot of us have written books, so that's one thing. Not all of us necessarily have. But all of us have, really been eBay users for a very long time and probably have other professional experience as trainers. Like I said, I've been training, I've been a trainer for 20 years before I started training for eBay. So I have a lot of experience in a lot of different kinds of venues, training people, and clearly have thought a lot about training. So I'm a trainer as well as an eBay user. And the thing that I didn't say in the beginning, because I think this really is true for a lot of people, most of us become trainers but never get any professional training. We either become trainers because we have a job that forced us to become a trainer or that kind of a thing. And very few of us study training. I mean, some people do, but my experience is most people don't. So that's why I was really happy to do this for you tonight. I think you need some extra advice about this.
Yeah, that's why we're really happy to have you, too. We sort of started this Monday night thing because we all feel that way. We want more training to be more effective, so we really appreciate you here for us.
Well, Cindy, I think we have time for one more question, but it's not going to be the one that just came in. They want Michael to tell a story about Janelle while on tour with her.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, no.
I'll tell you what. We'll do an auction for that.
No, we will not.
How about if we make it a charity auction?
Well, it would have to go for double if they're the New Orleans stories. So that's all I'm saying. All right. Just one final question, and it's not that one. Wendy of Web Wendy wants to know, what other skill sets do you think is necessary for trainers to have? And do you have resources you can recommend those?
That's a good question. I don't have any resources off the top of the head, but maybe we could put some together and we could post them somewhere. I think skill sets, clearly I talked about being an expert in the topic that you're training on. That's important. I think if you could get some facilitation training, that would also be good. Again, you could go to your favorite search engine and look up facilitation. Facilitation's used in a lot of different environments. It's used, for problem solving and other things. But learning facilitation skills, I have a whole thing I do on facilitation as well, is really important. I think learning about curriculum development, and you can get information on this about how to get curriculum together. And even though you're getting curriculum from eBay, to look how it's put together is also really important. And then if, just some public speaking experience, skill set. I mean, there are people that coach people. If you want to get some coaching, have some people come in. I highly recommend that people videotape at least a part of their training and go back and look at it. I know it's really cool, but look to see if you can find where you feel like you're really doing a good job and try and repeat that and do that over and over again. Those would be the kinds of skill sets that I think you really need. I think, being a good trainer, not everybody is a great trainer, unfortunately. You have to have the right kind of persona and personality, and you have to be able to be happy and smiling and standing in front of the room, even when behind that you're in a bad mood. You got to kind of drop it all at the door, and that's an important, I don't know if that's a skill or just a talent. I guess we could debate that some other time, but you need that to be a really good trainer.
Very cool. Well, Michael, I got to see you tomorrow, but I'm going to let Cindy finish up here. Thanks for answering all those questions.
Oh, my pleasure. And I see that you're putting up a really great array of guests coming up in the next month or two. That's great.
You see, she got Sharon Goldner to come on.
I think that's great. Sharon's terrific, and she's the one you should ask, how do you get to be an eBay U instructor?
Oh, you're being evil now.
Why not? Well, that would be the person to ask, wouldn't it?
It would be.
Well, she's agreed if we make it fast, so maybe I'll ask her that question. Maybe I won't. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been a wonderful training for us all. I know that everybody on the line has really learned a lot. I certainly have. And while you were talking, I was trying to take notes as fast as I can. But I really appreciate you coming online. Do you have any last words for us?
No, I just want to thank everybody for sticking in there, and I hope, what I would normally do if I were in a class now and we were all, and so this is a little tip for you for the end of your trainings, I would go around, not on a big 150 eBay U, but if I'm in a class of 25 or 30 people, I always end every training I do by going around the room and asking everybody to say either one thing they learned or one thing they're going to go do differently when they get home as a result of this training. And because it helps me, it shows me what they learned, but it helps them because it makes them sort of solidify, I want to tell you something that I learned, now they really know it. I'm going to tell you something I'm going to do differently, and now they commit to go doing that. And remember in the very beginning, we said that training is about change, about getting people to change. And so you always want to check in with people at the end and have them do that.
So, Michael, that's an excellent tip. I'm going to try it in my next class.
You'll love it. It's very reaffirming for the trainer.
Oh, great. I've got one coming up next week, so I'm going to give it a shot.
Good.
Well, I want to thank you again. I really appreciate you coming on this program. And I want to thank Janelle at OSIRockStars.com for hosting this program. And for all of you listening in, I want to thank you for choosing success as well. And hopefully we'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.